Yeah. I don't usually use a clipboard, by the way, but I just wanted to make sure I don't forget anything important that I wanted to ask.
Like your most embarrassing day at school.
Yeah, Nigel Hughes, welcome to the Gyaff. Thank you so much for joining us. This is such a pleasure to have you here. And I can't wait to chat with you. How are you doing?
I am good, Alex. A real privilege to be here. If I tell you that I perhaps knew you before you were born, so
Yeah.
this is pretty ironic life.
Was I always such a looker?
No, I now realize you obviously took the better part of both parents. Your father was definitely a big head. Ask my sister. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's really nice to be here and doing this. We kind of like to have a diverse range of guests, and who can offer, their experiences, some wisdom, and we discuss, current events. But I want to start with you. You're a highly revered lawyer. You're a successful businessman. You're a well-known politician. Is there anything you don't do? Are you a bad cook or something? Like, is there like?
My wife would say she wished I cooked.
Yeah.
No. I'm just typical of my generation, I think. It's just that I happen to be here. But if you picked anybody from any of my classes, whether it's saints, bishops, we all at the same place. Some are very high flyers.
Nice.
So
What do you think is the difference between your generation and maybe the current one now, or today's young people?
I think you guys got a lot more opportunity. You have grown up in an environment in which you got a lot more choices. You're living in Guyana at a much better time. I mean, really fantastic time compared to back then. So socially, just the number of restaurants, the number of social options that you have. Classic example, I love the outdoors. Back in my time, getting to Latham took you probably a day and a half. I mean, it was a great adventure, but you had to have the resources, the vehicles, and I never discovered Guyana in its true sense until I came back. So one of the good things about your generation, is now you guys can hop in a car, drive down to Anai, drive to Latham. If you want to go overland to Kite Shore, trek, a lot easier than back in the day.
Yeah, you've been spending a lot of time in the in the hinterland region lately, have you?
That's politically, but I've always been in. I
Okay,
love the
gotcha.
hinterland. So, for example, I've climbed Roraima 3 times.
No way.
Yeah.
From the Venezuelan
from
side?
the Venezuelan.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look at me. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
definitely 3 times from the Venezuelan side. Love it. Done Kaitro Overland. We've gone all the way down to Ishalton. Actually, is an Ashibab the other way. But all of this before politics. I
Yeah.
actually had a bit of a scare. I got a heart attack in the Marudi Mountains. I was
my God.
down there doing humanitarian work, and I was in the middle of the gold mining camp where there had been an incident, and got a heart attack. And God is good. I'm here today.
How long ago was this?
2013 took me 4 hours to get from the back dam to Ishalton, and then the people at Ishalton were fantastic. They looked after me. The Medivac came in and took me out. And then I eventually got Medivac to Trinidad.
Wow. I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm glad you're okay. When you get to have an experience like that, I mean, those kind of health scares are quite big, and it's sort of, for many people, it sort of makes you reflect on a lot of things. Was it a turning point for you in like maybe your overall health or whatever the case, maybe how you look at life?
It was a turning point. I remember what was foremost in my mind was I didn't want my mother to have to bury a child. That, if there was anything that caused me to really make it was that I just didn't want my mother to bury a child. And so that was the number one thing. After that, of course, the regime changes, you strict diet, et cetera, backsliding badly at the moment. But I would say that was it really.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was pretty emotional lying in bed and looking at my mom and seeing her hold my hand and say, I don't want to bury any of my children.
Yeah. That's super heartbreaking. I mean, but with regards to the backsliding, like I would say, obviously you want to keep good habits, but we gotta have, some sort of, we gotta let go sometime, right? You kind of can't always be
You
on the
can't
straight
let
and
go
narrow.
all the time. That's the problem.
Yeah. I'm a big believer in working out. I mean, like I just think like not only physical, but just the mental, fitness of like, especially in this day and age where there's so many distractions, there's so much like that is consuming your attention and pushing a lot of anxiety and mental unwellness. I think the gym or, the treadmill or whatever really helps, in my opinion.
That's another good thing about your generation. I think we're far more aware now about mental health, not
Yeah.
just physical health. I think people are always trying to be physically fit, but I think the mental health aspect now is really important.
Yeah.
And people recognize it, which is important because before, people would be depressed and they think, oh, I'm just feeling down today, without realizing that there may be actually a clinical problem.
Yeah.
And so now that we have more tools and it is easier to detect earlier, I think we're in a better place for that. And also just many other options in terms of, dealing with difficulties. You
Yeah.
don't have to be embarrassed, in other
Sure.
words,
Yeah.
And that's a big thing because I think before people felt embarrassed, if
For sure.
and didn't feel that they could come out and talk about it.
Yeah, it's definitely better. I mean, I do think we have a ways to go. And obviously, like I said, it's kind of. I think the problem is bigger. And the number is maybe.
Yeah, that's the other thing.
No.
I think because we probably have better detection tools and also we're living with a lot more pressure, it's a lot wider.
Yeah.
Mental health is a lot wider. We probably more sensitive to it, but at the same time, I think just trying to cope today. I mean, just your phone, trying to, people text you all over the place. People expect. Think about it. In just as our parents were going to hand over to us, a letter back in the early 70s would take 3 weeks to get to the UK. Now, if you don't respond to your client in under 24 hours or just about 24 hours, you're beginning to be delinquent.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of pressure. If you really think about it, it's a lot of pressure. Your cell phone, just your whole life is on that phone, and you're trying to track everything. Your emails, you're doing this. It's telling you where your heartbeat is.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. I feel like sometimes I'm controlled by my phone. Like I really have to like take a breath and put it down and just remove myself from the area. It's bad, and like
Can you actually do that? Do you succeed other than when you're sleeping in the night?
and like it's a practice. I think like no, the answer is no. But I think that if it's just a 5-10 minutes, I feel like for me it's like doing some reps, right? It's like
Okay.
I've managed to do it. I'm not gonna just go back on and be hungry, but you know how sometimes it just pulls you, with the social media, with the emails, with the calls, whatever. But yeah, it's a very interesting time we live in, and I feel like I never thought I'd have that problem, and it's addiction, plain and simple.
Yeah, it is. It is.
But yeah, but let's talk about you. What's your like sort of background as a Guyanese? Like, where'd you come from? What would have been like your key experiences? From a young Guyanese to now. Not to put any pressure on you. This is just sort of like a get to know you kind of thing.
I know. And at the end of this, everybody will say, "Yeah, he's some bourgeois aristocrat," but it's okay. I was going to say you could ask your dad this question because he used to live across in Better Garden. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. So I grew up in Sobrianville. Literally was born there. Grew up my entire life in Sobrianville until I got married and left and went to live in New Providence, where I am now.
Okay.
Professional parents. Dad was an attorney, and my mom was actually the first non-foreign manager for Booker's. It was quite a feat in the day. I think she became a manager. I think it was 19. When did she come back from Jamaica? Maybe 61 or thereabouts.
Bookers.
See, full generation gap.
Yeah.
Anybody my age, if you said Booker's, it would be like saying JetBlue. It's just so no. Okay, so Booker's is where Guyana Stores is now.
Okay.
Booker's literally owned Guyana, so it owned all the sugar estates. New GPC, that used to be Booker's Pharmacy, the Universal Building where Guyana Stores is, all of that was Booker's. The Georgetown Club, that is where, a lot of that was a club for the managers for Booker's. Booker's was foreign owned and literally controlled every aspect of Guyana's economy by and large.
Right.
Just by virtue of they controlled sugar for a long time. So it was the centers. So Booker's, as you can imagine, in any part of colonial Caribbean, was essentially at management level staffed by foreigners, people from the UK or maybe Europe. And so my mom read history in Jamaica at University College of the West Indies, did well, came back, bright bishop's girl, and she became the first manager, female, which was a big thing in those days. She's also was darker, so that was also a big thing. And then she took the most remarkable decision. So I'm 64 born, my sister is 66. And somewhere between 66 and when my brother was born in 69, she decided that this is it. I am going to stay home and raise my family. Mm-hmm. And so as a manager, people kept asking her, you sure this is what you want to do? You got this career ahead of you as a woman, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what she did. And if I were to plant my academic achievements anywhere, it would be the fact that she was there.
Yeah.
She was there for us.
She spent a lot of time investing in you guys, like in your education.
110%.
Yeah.
I mean, she did everything. Like most moms does. They pick you up from school, take you to music lessons, take you to sports. I used to be an athlete, take you from Saints.
Oh yeah? What'd you play?
Actually, I used to do 200, 400 high jump, long jump.
No way.
Yeah, man. I was actually champion boy at Saints. And I played football as well.
Okay.
So I represented Georgetown. I used to goalkeep for Georgetown. I used to goalkeep for Saints. I used to goalkeep for Georgetown. And the year that I was goalkeeping for Georgetown, we actually won. So that was it. Never made it to nationals as an athlete. Got certainly to inter-school. Did well there. And used to play White Cup cricket, which was like, I think, the lowest of the leagues at the time. We used to play White Cup cricket for Saints. We had a team that played White Cup cricket.
Yeah.
Back in the day.
But so, obviously, did you prioritize your athletics at that age, or you always were serious about education or being an academic?
No, my life was planned for me.
Yeah. Well, in all fairness, sorry to cut you. In all fairness, a lot of kids whose parents take an active role in their life sort of plan out their path, for better or worse.
I had a very strong-willed father who figured that all his children should become lawyers, and I happened to be the first one, right? So from the time I was born, I knew I was going to become a lawyer, and everything was built around that, and I wasn't necessarily as rebellious as my sister who came after me. Mm-hmm. So she cut a deal with him, and she did law, but said, I'm going to be a designer. So she just kept him happy, did the law degree, and went off and did her designing. And by the time my brother came around, that was it. He was not doing law, and he became an engineer. But no, I knew literally going through primary school, secondary school, that I was going to become a lawyer. My dad had a law firm, and the whole thing is you got to take over the firm and blah, blah, blah. So I grew up in that kind of, I'm sure you're not unfamiliar with that kind of
I understand
scenario. And that was it. So it wasn't if I chose law. This was the family business. Somebody got to run it, and I happened to be the first one. So that's what happened there.
Yeah.
No big fancy story.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's, I will say it's a big thing to have to, it's obviously a privilege to take over a business that's established already, but to carry it on and take it to the next level is also very commendable.
Thank you.
But do you, I mean, you obviously enjoy the practice of law now.
No, I don't complain. I think, other than being a lawyer, I'd probably be a jazz musician, and that would have been a much harder life.
So weird you say that. Just I was gonna ask you what kind of music you listen to, and I was like, he looks like a jazz guy.
You mean I'm that old, right?
Yeah. No, but sorry, I was so, you practice it now. What is your sort of philosophy on the practice of law? Like, how do you sort of go about it? Like,
What I would share with you is the old man was very successful commercial law, never touched criminal law at all. The firm actually, himself, Stobie Enfields, never touched criminal law. They had a great reputation, big commercial firm, worked for the banks, did the overseas clients. And when I came back, I was very concerned that people will say, if I ever made it, I made it because of him. So I went into criminal law simply because I wanted to say, hey, if I make it as a lawyer, it's not because the old man held me in his shoulders and made it. I went into criminal law. I was very lucky. The year I started practicing, 1988, which is probably before you were born, they brought in the Psychotropic and Narcotics Act. So automatically, this was part of a deal for Guyana to get funding from the United States or the IMF or something. So they passed this very draconian legislation that said that if you got caught with anything above a gram, you were mandatory imprisonment for 3 years, 3 to 5 actually. And I started practicing then. I had some good results consistently, and then people figured that I was the narcotics lawyer.
yeah.
That then more of, I think I developed a bit of some skill in cross-examining, so I sort of went on the bigger criminal stuff, the jury, before the jury and trials and the assizes. But the thing is, most of the work, because I was in the firm, was commercial work. But commercial work is not glamorous. It doesn't make headlines. So I'd spend 80% of my time doing commercial work, but the headlines were always the criminal work. So people, read about me, I suppose.
So 20% of your day-to-day was the criminal law.
Yeah.
And then obviously the
'cause
company is.
I don't want to say
80%.
criminal law is easy, but the thing about criminal law is you get up, the work is in court. Once you know your facts, you've done your
Yeah.
research, the work
Yeah.
is in court. And when you walk out of court, that's it. You don't
Yeah.
have to go worry about stuff. I mean, you go back over your stuff, but commercial stuff, you gotta literally crawl through that stuff, cross-reference, double-check, make sure.
All the paperwork.
Yeah, I remember back in the day, personal computers, there were no, personal computers had just started. I think Amstrad had started in the UK. And so we were going through the word processing phase first when I first came back.
Mm-hmm.
Faxes were the big thing in those days. And I remember we were working for an Australian company that was in mining. And we got a fax from them from 6 o'clock in the next day. So it was like 6 p.m. in Sydney. And it was like 6 p.m. the day before in Guyana. And I just remember looking at that fax and thinking, wow, it's almost like faxing from tomorrow. Now we know. Yeah, but in the day, it was, it was pretty phenomenal. Yeah, and we came through the technology. I think all of us recognize that the practice of law is going to change to the stage now where I don't want to go into court. I want to keep it virtual.
Yeah.
I mean, only in mandatory cases would I go. I'd rather deal with it virtually.
Yeah. Just one last point on the your smaller portion of work being the criminal law and that being the headliner sort of cases and whatnot. How did you sort of deal with that? I mean, because you're sort of, I guess with criminal law there's headlines are headlines. There's a lot of insinuation, a lot of unnecessary or unwanted publicity. Like, how do you sort of manage that stuff whilst and not have that detract from like your the bigger business practice side?
The hardest thing in criminal law, which is worse than anything you'd probably face in civil, is when the jury comes back on in a murder case back in the day where the death penalty was mandatory for murder. I'm talking about practice. The jury comes back and says guilty for murder. You think, oh God. And then the judge says, all rise. They take a pencil, he takes a pencil or she takes a pencil and they break it. And then they say to the accused who's standing right behind you, you shall hang by your neck until dead. The first guilty verdict I got on the murder, that was a life-changing experience. Because you discover as a lawyer then that it's not about you. It's about the man behind you. This is a guy who's just been told that his life will come to an end in the most violent way. And you have to turn around and give him hope. One, we're going to appeal, yes, but you still have to address, even if this is the most heinous of convicts, you still have to address the fact that you're being told that the state will break your neck at some stage. And that to me, I it's not that I wish everybody goes through it, but I think it is necessary if you want to become a good lawyer. You got to be able to deal with that. Yeah. And the first time I got that, I decided, this thing about the state killing people, especially in a mandatory way, not acceptable, completely unacceptable. And particularly when the investigation and detection processes are so, how do I put it?
Compromised?
Yeah, less than efficient. Because, in those days, the police would come and say, John Smith confessed, I killed Mary Brown. And that's it. They did no forensic investigation. So other than this confession, which invariably was obtained in very, very dubious circumstances, you can have your neck broken. And that's a dangerous place to be. I remember the very first time I ever went into police headquarters back in the day. Skip Roberts, I think, might have been the crime chief. And there was a squad, quick reaction group. On the road, they were known as the Death Squad. And they had an office on the ground floor up at Ivleri, dark floor, but dark room, ominous-looking people because they wore dark clothes, strapping guys. And I went to see a client. And, me, enthusiastic, I come in and I'm going to see a client, and I push the door of the quick reaction room. And my client is Indian male, maybe about 5'8", 5'9". He is literally tied to a post. There's a post in the middle of the room. And they have some sort of rope around one of his testicles. And the other end of the rope was attached to the door handle, and they were slamming the door closed. So I walk in, so when I opened the door, they had just slammed it closed, and this guy was like, clearly he was in and out of consciousness, and I thought, no. I mean, it was bizarre. And I can tell you some awful stories about what happened back in the day in there. Really, really dark time. Yeah. Dark time.
But did you have any role in helping to abolish the death penalty when that happened?
I'd like to say, yeah, I was a convert for abolishing the death penalty. We actually formed a Caribbean group that used to fly. So if there was a death, if somebody had been read the death warrant in Trinidad, we would go over, and we've done some pretty famous cases here where we brought Trinidadian and Caribbean Counsel to Guyana. Death warrants were invariably read on a Thursday.
Yeah.
And they would say, we're going to hang you on Monday. So we had, 3 days to go to the court and try and get a stay.
Yeah.
And the first one we did was Yassin and Thomas. And what happened in Yassin and Thomas was that they read Yassin and Thomas, they went through the appeals, they lost all the appeals, they went to the prerogative of mercy, didn't get through. And I suppose in a Guyana context, it was one Indian, one African, so it was okay to hang them. They read them the warrant on the Thursday. They saw their then counsel, who told them, you ain't got no hope, all you got to do is beg the president. You can't do anything. And the family came to me, and I immediately activated this group. Douglas Mendez from Trinidad, Reggie Amor, who is now the AG in Trinidad, Gregory Delson, a whole set of Stephen Fraser was here with me. And we had to go to death row for the first time. So just want to give you a context. When you go to the prison to visit people before, and this is in Camp Street before it burnt down, they would always bring the prisoners from the cell down to the reception area, which is pretty rough. But anyway, down to the reception area where you would take your instructions from them.
Yeah.
But people who are in death row, they never brought out of the wing. So they were up on like the third floor. So we actually had to go to death row. And one of our grounds in the application for a stay and in the substantive action was that death is a cruel and unusual punishment and that all this stuff. So we for the first time I walked through the prison yard and we go up to the third floor. And when we get up there, it was like the Marriott because every other cell you passed had 10 men a cell, 6 men a cell. On death row was one person a cell. But the frightening thing about death row was they kept them in that cell for 23 out of the 24 hours in a day, and they would only let them out onto the corridor. So these guys then come out and go into the yard to get sunlight. They would only be allowed out of the room, into the corridor, walk up and down for an hour, and then they'd go back in the room. So physically, when you see it, you think all the stuff you put about, how depressing it was, wasn't quite as bad. So compared to the guys who were 10 in a cell, this was okay.
Yeah.
But the scary thing about death row is this. The gallows were in the middle of death row. So you'd have 1, 2, 3 cell, gallows, 4, 5, 6, and on the opposite side, you'd have a full cell block, right? So
What are gallows?
okay, gallows is where they hang you.
Oh, gosh.
Right.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
literally, gallows is a space. They put you on a platform. They move the floor. Bang, you fall, and the rope breaks your neck.
So
right.
it was like basically a public execution.
Yeah, it's like it wasn't public, but it's an execution.
Whoa.
So it gets worse. So, so the gallows are in the middle of the cell. So you are literally and it's a wooden. It's not a concrete wall. It's a wooden wall. So. The gallows are right next to you. But here's what happens. So they come, they read the warrant to you on a Thursday night. They weigh you on Thursday night. So if you're fit like you're 180 pounds or whatever, they will then go and get a sandbag and fill it with sand until it's 180 pounds. And they would then take that sandbag up to the third floor where the gallows were. And they would tie it to whatever they tied it to, the rope. And then they would just practice, right? So they'd be throwing it over and you'd hear this loud noise, da-dang, da-dang, da-dang. And they'd be doing this repeatedly. And then they'd walk past the cell of the guys who were supposed to be hung and say, Monday, Monday, Monday. So psychologically, you can imagine what happens between Friday morning and supposedly what the time when they're supposed to be executed, which I can't remember, what is 6:30 or 8:30. And fortunately, in all the cases that we did apply for a stay, we got a stay and we saved lives. So I think as a result of that Yassin and Thomas decision, I can't remember what year it was, might have been, not sure, in the early 90s perhaps, they've never hung anybody else. They have never hung anybody else. People have been sentenced to death, but they never hung because, of course, that case up to now I don't think has been ever heard and determined. And that was part of the legal strategy that we had at the time. But yeah, so I'm a firm believer in I'm anti-death penalty.
Yeah.
And in Guyana, even if you are pro-death penalty, you have to have, for me, 95 to 98% certainty. And that can only come from forensics, and we don't do forensics in Guyana, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Think of all those people in the United States, 40 years in jail, 30 years in jail, and what let them go was forensics,
Yeah. But there has to be a problem with the system now. Like, I mean, in terms of, you're right. I do agree. Like, you can't arbitrarily sentence someone to death. At least not with being totally out, 98%. I don't know if that's the number. I'm not experienced in that. But in terms of the system now, like, or even back then, is there any sort of pathway to reform, or do people just leave the institution and not be able to catch their foot? And then what does reform even look like?
Right. So I'm glad you mentioned that. But let me just tell you something. The other thing about death row and people who end up there, it's always the poor. Eh?
Yeah.
It's always the poor who either couldn't afford counsel, they get counsel who's assigned. Counsel doesn't pay as much attention as a state assignment. Whatever the reason, it's if you look at the demographic, other than Mr. Yassin, everybody else who was in death row came from difficult circumstances. Mm-hmm. So that's one big problem because I mean you sending people who are poor to death because your system just ends up sending poor people. Rich people tend to hire better lawyers, and invariably, if they do get convicted, they probably don't get sentenced to death because they do fantastic pleas and mitigation. They challenge the human rights aspect. They have all those options available to them, so they don't end up there. And if you think of Guyana now, if you got enough money, invariably you probably didn't even make it to court. But that's just unfortunately how the system works. But you were asking me, and the good thing is since the fire, there's no gallows anymore. So we don't have the capacity to hang anybody right now. And I think there are probably about 12.5 persons who have been sentenced to death who are in prison. We did, maybe about 2 years ago with some British counsel, challenge the death penalty, and the CCJ in that case, what actually happens, the Court of Appeal reduced it from death to life. So by the time we got to the CCJ, they said it was an academic argument and they didn't want to touch it because the death penalty was a big problem in the Caribbean before the CCJ got established, because a lot of people felt that the Privy Council was anti-death penalty and therefore were delivering judgments which were reversing penalties of death. Mm-hmm. And so they thought the CCJ back in the day before it got established would be a hanging court because there was such a big call for blood. I mean, they had really bad crimes, particularly in Trinidad. So there was a, I would say, Caribbean-wide call to hang. And Jamaica, for example, where there are really awful offenses, criminal offenses where people get sentenced to death, they wanted death, but they didn't want to trust the CCJ, so they still with the Privy Council. But yeah, so the CCJ, when they came in, everybody, certainly people like me in the profession, we said, oh, it might be a hanging court. I think did their best to. They had a couple of things they wanted to establish. One is that they were just as good as the British law lords, so they wanted to make sure that the quality of jurisprudence was very good. And then they wanted to establish themselves not as a hanging court, as that we'll hear reasoned arguments, and they did some great work in dealing with the death penalty. And as a result of that and public pressure, they changed it from being mandatory to specified cases. If you kill a police officer, military officer in the course of execution of duty, et cetera, those were death eligible.
Wow, I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
Interesting to know. But technically now they can't carry out any of those penalties just because the gallows no longer exist.
The gallows don't exist.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I hope Guyana is not at the barbaric stage where in 2024 or any time post-2024 we would actually physically construct the gallows. Yeah. I mean, it's...
But Nigel, just on that question, and I just want to pivot quickly to, and I totally get where you're coming from a humanitarian perspective. I'm just wondering because, we see a lot of many people slipping through the cracks of the justice system and getting away with things like murder and, these serious crimes. And I'm not advocating, they should be killed. But then, people have this, Guyanese in particular, have a tendency to push hard for vigilante justice, which is another issue because there's a lot of injustice that the system, gives to us. And then there's a need for, I guess, people to push back. And I know it's not black and white. And that in itself that's almost even worse in terms of the verifiable nature of who you're punishing and how you punish them. But then how do you we're kind of left in a frustrated system, no?
No, I was going to say, Alex, we're going to have our first big debate tonight. So
yeah, please.
You said people slip through the cracks. And you were suggesting that there are people who you believe are guilty of offenses who are being acquitted. Uh-huh. Essentially, I think that's what you're saying, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, correct.
The first thing is, if somebody gets acquitted, it's 12 people like you sitting in that jury. They're supposed to reflect the society, right? So let's take the most heinous of crimes that we've had, the Lusignan massacre. 11 people dead. At the time, they charged two people who they had created a certain reputation, notoriety. Rondell Williams, sorry, was he Rondell? Royden Williams and the other defendant. So the society is now livid because if 11 people get killed in as awful a killing as those people in Lusignan, which is literally some gunmen go in the street.
I remember.
They open fire, babies got murdered, women, awful, right? And typical police at the time, probably still doing, they round up the usual suspects. Oh, Buxton was bad, so we run into Buxton. We pick up Royden Williams, who they had issued wanted bulletins for. So if you're in Guyana, you see a wanted bulletin, God forbid, for Alex Arjun, everybody assumes, hey, Alex has done some really bad stuff. The police wouldn't ask for him unless he's done something bad. So there's a negative perception start. And so the police pick them up and they charge them. Takes maybe about 4 or 5 years for them to get before the jury. We are before a mixed jury. This is not a jury of African people, Indian people only, or mixed people. This is a completely mixed jury. I think maybe 4 Indians, 4 Africans. They had an indigenous mixed people. Real Guyanese jury. And they have their best prosecutor. And they actually have a star witness who says he was a member of the, I can't even remember whoever, the gang. Was it, not Blackie gang, it would have been Fine Man Gang, yeah sorry, who says he's a member of the Fine Man Gang, who's their key witness, right?
Yeah.
He is in protective custody. He has confessed to 32 murders, and he's taken into protective custody, okay? So you have a man who has confessed to 32 murders, who they're bringing as their star witness. And you have, as the key police investigator, a really arrogant, I am the police. Whatever I do is right. I am the bad man. If I say so, and then he says that this man who has confessed, kid, I can't remember, 17, 18, to 32 murders, has never been charged with any. None. He never got charged with any of them. You confess to 32 murders, you don't get charged with any of them because you're a star witness. No. The 12 Guyanese sitting there think, well, buddy, if I confess to 32 people and I ain't get charged, I would sing wherever you want me to sing. I would be a hippopotamus, I'd be a rhinoceros. I would tell you whatever you want. And when that is coupled with a police officer who says, yes, actually, let me quote. In cross-examination by me, he actually said, yes, I'm God. Come on. They throw their own case because the impression the jury gets, and all they have is a confession. They don't have any eyewitnesses. All they have is a confession which even the contents of the confession in terms of time didn't make any sense. Contradictory. Because they're so arrogant, they don't even bother to see the story that they're forcing the people to sign to is incoherent in and of itself. So, and this, the people they pick up are not necessarily the most articulate, right? Mm-hmm. The judge admitted the statement into evidence. So the jury sees the statement and they see the star police witness. They see this man who has confessed to 32 crimes, who is facing no charges and will face no charges. And that mixed jury of all those ethnicities came back not guilty. Now, you may call that slipping through the cracks. I call that they had the wrong people, because the police don't bring any forensic evidence. They had no eyewitness. They had nothing. And this is in the days of Buxton, where you were afraid to drive through. So if you come and all you present on a 11-count indictment of murder is a confession that in itself has contradictions on timing and other things, and you have a policeman who is in the box who says, yes, I'm God to him, Come on.
Yeah.
You're going to send somebody to death for that? They actually came back not guilty. And of course, everybody says, oh my God, you defended the Lusignan killers and da-da-da. That's my work. I get hired to do that. But what people don't see is where the police don't do their work, where they don't do the investigation, where they don't cross-reference. Because if you looked at the statement and that's all you had, the least you would expect is that the statement makes sense.
Yeah.
Gotta make sense. Statement didn't make sense. And how do you justify not charging somebody for 32 murders as your star witness? What do you think you're going to think? This guy is going to say anything you want him to say. Mm-hmm. If you had charged him and he knew he was going to get sentenced, or if you charged him and sentenced him, then a little bit more credibility. But you keep him, and they didn't even keep him in the prison. They didn't want to say where they kept him. You keep him, you feed him, you look after him, and he's your star witness. I'm not sure that you would feel confident that that is the sort of evidence that you would want to rely on, where he has the greatest motive to live because he hasn't been charged with 32 murders.
Yeah, and the police could just pull anybody from anywhere.
Yeah, and it was the environment. So to me, when you get a mixed jury like that, sending that back. So and it was mixed also. Wasn't all urban. Quite a few were rural. Of course, mixed ethnicity, mixed social standing too. Mm-hmm. What are you going to say? The system doesn't work? They slip through the cracks? They didn't slip through the cracks. The police didn't do the work.
Right.
And we don't know that they had the right people.
As a lawyer, why even get close to that? You know what I mean? It's such a.
When you say get close, what do you mean?
Why take the case, or why?
You don't choose the clients.
Okay, they just came for representation.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, if I start judging people
right.
based on what the police accuse them of doing,
mm-hmm.
then I am assuming some sort of moral superiority based on allegations.
Yeah.
And there's no way I would do that. Not as a criminal defense attorney. I don't assume that I'm in any position to judge you morally. And I say that to all clients. When you come to me, I'm not a priest. And I say that to the law students. The second you feel that you somehow have a position that may be emotional on a case, don't do it. Because you cease to think objectively about it. So if you really believe somebody is innocent and I got to fight to make sure that they get off, then you're biased one way. If you think, oh my God, this priest molested this young man, and how could he possibly do it? I've heard so many stories about him molesting other people. If you're going to make a moral judgment, then don't do it. The legal profession will have criminal defense attorneys. That's what the business of the criminal defense industry is.
Yeah.
So if you're saying that people should not take cases because they're
I'm not saying they shouldn't take it. I'm just curious how you're able to separate the two, because for me that feels impossible to do. I not to say that I can come and pass moral superiority on anyone under their circumstance, but Let me ask you a question. Did
OJ do it?
I don't know. That case was before my time, and I didn't follow too much.
Picked up the glove, handed it to him. The glove didn't fit, and my boy walked.
Yeah.
I suppose half of America thought, or more than half, thought that, hey, somebody just slipped through the cracks, as you put it.
Sure. Okay. I'll take that as thank you.
No, but the one thing I hope that I've done in my years at the bar is that I don't come to a view on who comes to retain me. Sorry. No, not at all. Of course, the limits. I mean, if somebody who's accused of having murdered a friend, or I tend not to do sexual offenses cases generally, but that's not from the point of view of any sort of moral position. It's just they're unpleasant.
Yeah,
generally.
Gotcha. All right, awesome. That covered a lot of my my topics I had on
you and law. So here's where we say good night. Thank you.
No, absolutely not. We just getting warmed up here. But thank you for being so open with me. I do appreciate the time you're taking to explain and break this down, and to hear it from that perspective. obviously a lot of our feelings as a society are influenced by the public narrative, right? Like the noise, and it's normal in any society, and I get that. So these sort of frustrations fester, and we kind of sort of put it out there, and we're a mirror for all this stuff. And obviously people have bad experiences that may reinforce some of these complicated things. But
Can I offer a comment there?
of course,
Everybody condemns you. Long you can defend these people. The second they have a problem in their family, and one of them is potentially vulnerable to criminal sanction, the same people who had all the moral condemnation to heap upon you find you like yesterday.
yeah,
And it's not for me to say, hey, I wouldn't defend you. I mean, some of the people who have said the worst things about me have hired me.
I know.
That's just the game. I don't have a view either way. I mean, you come to me after you finish cussing me out. I don't have a difficulty with that.
Yeah.
That's the work.
Yeah. Brings me into my next topic. So you ready to talk politics?
Yeah. I'm open.
Yeah. So, first of all, I just want to, I guess we could preface it. I'll circle back to this, but, at what point have
You don't have to dress it up, Alex.
No, I'm not dressing it up. I just want to structure it so I keep my train
Okay.
on the tracks and we don't wander too much.
Remember, my business is to get into your head, right?
Yeah. Oh, what's so funny? Not a lot of people know I'm doing this interview, but I have just a quick sidebar here. I have a few friends who I consult on these because they're very smart guys, and in my opinion, and they have very measured opinions. They don't go straight to the cuss out and emotional thing, and they all have varying opinions. And I mentioned to a couple of them that I was going to talk to you, and the responses were so funny because the ones that were fans of you or were not fans of you, they were all like, careful, because you can't outsmart him. You can swallow you up, whatever argument you come with. But I'm happy you're doing it because I'm happy to have that discourse because I at the end of the day, I think we could still learn things from each other.
Opinions in me are strong. They're never halfway. I either hate this son of a gun, or yeah, buddy, he all right, he good. There ain't nothing halfway here. So I don't know why it is. That's just how it is. So I get that every day.
What point of your career did you feel the need to get into politics? I mean, you do pretty well in business. You're obviously very good at the legal profession, the lawyering. Why take on that challenge? It just seems like that's such a big headache to deal with when you're still contributing positively to society in your own way. In your scope of work. Why jump into something like this where, and with a third party, when things are so black and white in our political spectrum,
All
or
right,
black and brown.
You got all night?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so
You could give me the cliff notes if you want.
So this is how this starts, and I'm gonna try to compress this as much as I can. I had a very, very typical middle class, privileged upbringing. Grew up in a bubble. I grew up in Sobrianville. Every possible racial group, we all hung out together, and a lot of the difficulties that existed in the society, completely unaware. Okay. That's but that's nothing special about me. That's how everybody, in whether you went to Saints, Bishops, QC, St. Joseph's, that was the life.
Yeah.
Okay. I finished Saints. I go to Bishops. I got a different experience, but again, this is school number 2 or number 1 in the country, or depending where it is, but in the top 5, right? You well at Bishops, and I go to university in England. I go and read law, University College, London. And the scales start to fall off your eyes, because then you're not a privileged kid. You're not
hot shit anymore.
Yeah, you're not even if you're hot shit. Even if you're hot shit in class because you're young and you're troubling the girls and the girls kind of react. But you're not Clarence and Christabel's son. You are just another brick in the wall. But it was not the anonymity, it was the prejudice. I saw the prejudice raw. And not in the university because everybody's horrendously sophisticated. And of course, to be there, they figure out that you're in the same class, so this color thing. But when you see it up front, close, and personal, when you get on the tube, the subway, when you walk down the street, when you see cops pull you over just because you're walking while black. I remember when I was in the UK, the skinheads, these are Nazi fascists, would go down the street just to beat up African youth. I had about 3 encounters with them. And in those days, they used to leave the milk bottles outside of the door. So the British used to leave the milk bottles outside of the door. And the milkman would come and collect them the next day. And I'm going down the road, and there's 6 skinheads ahead of me. So I know at this stage, I can't turn around and run because they run behind me and catch me. I'm not going to cross the street because that's fear. You're demonstrating to them. And I remember as they got close, it was obvious that they meant business. I picked up 2 milk bottles, broke them, and I found the Jamaican accent because the Jamaican accent is the best oral defense you can have. I found that Jamaican accent, and they left me alone because they knew one of them was going to go. This here wasn't going to end. It might have ended badly for me, but it would have ended badly for one of them. My brother, when he was in school in England, was in a pub one night. Football crowd comes in, and they picking him and they beat the shit out of him. Excuse my French. Beat him.
Please.
King's Cross, beat him. And the other thing about studying in the UK was it also exposed you to all the revolutionary literature that there was. So one of the first books that I read was Wretched of the Earth, Frantz Fanon. Then read Black Skin, White Masks. Apartheid was raging in those days. You had Botha was president or prime minister, whatever he was, and Maggie Thatcher, who was prime minister in the UK, and Ronald Reagan. And both of them were sympathetic to the South African regime. And, started by joining protest marches down the street on Saturday. And then you would actually see on TV live what was going on in Soweto. When Stephen Biko got killed, when, every night these guys you'd see the news about what was going on in South Africa. And the students were also quite radical. So in the university union, which is student union, they had some pretty radical politics. And it just opened your eyes. And then as you read more and more, you go through all the standard stuff, autobiography of Malcolm X, blah, 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 all the other stuff. I realized, I should say, that the structure of the world is not exactly what I thought it would be. And so since then, I got actively involved in politics. It would have started with the anti-apartheid movement. And then, of course, it comes to the Caribbean. And you read C.L.R. James, all the greats that have written about the history, Black Jacobins. There was an excellent book in French called La Rue Casse-Nègre, which is Black Shakali, about somebody growing up in Martinique, I think it was, and just how the structure of the system was. And you realize that, it's one thing to be privileged, but you really, if you want to change the world, to quote Andai, you've got to get involved and you've got to stand for something. You've got to have a position on some things. Now, it doesn't mean you have to be irrational in what you do, but you got to have a position. At the time, I remember when I was in the UK, the elections were a big issue in Guyana, and we campaigned for free and fair elections. I came back, and GARD.
This was what year?
I came back to Guyana in 1988.
Okay.
So I left in 82 and I came back in 88. So I
Right.
did first degree, second degree law school and practiced for about a year and then came back. Came back and there was a movement called GUARD, which is the Guyana, I can't remember what it stood for. Spoke on their platform talking about free and fair elections and absolutely necessary. Desmond Hoyt was the president at the time. On that platform, spoke a couple of times. There was Sam Hines, Yesu Prasad, this guy that used to be Minister of Labour, Gopal, Nanda Gopal, lots of people. And we were talking about a new Guyana because what had happened then was Hoyt had come in. He'd brought back the free press. So you had the Stabroek News. Before that, you always had the Catholic Standard, but that had limited circulation. Stabroek News came, and we really believed that Guyana was beginning to go on a different path. So a lot of privatizations, things started to improve, but at the same time, elections was an issue, and I got involved in that since then.
Yeah.
I actually got an offer to. The PPP had a pretty strong supporter, a lawyer called Ayub Makdoum, and he came to me and made me an offer of being in. I should join the People's Progressive Party and all that stuff. Declined. Coming through the years,
Why'd you decline?
I wasn't interested in politics. I mean, I wasn't remotely interested in politics in '92. In the sense of being actively in politics. I certainly had very strong views on what needed to be changed. I was actually, when I go back again, sorry, I'm jumping all over the place.
That's okay.
When I was in Performance Saints, Father Dark got murdered right outside of the school. He was taking photographs and he got murdered outside of the school. Rodney died when I had just finished maths exams and I joined the funeral for Walter Rodney, huge funeral. I can't remember, 30,000 people. They were saying people's power, no dictator, people's power, no dictator, marching down the street. I was in uniform marching down the street because the old man said to me, you should go because history may happen today. You don't know what's going to happen. So growing up when Rodney campaigned, Rodney was a great intellect, really great intellect. And he actually put the world in a perspective which perhaps most of us didn't know about before and how the economic structures worked and what have you. So since those days, didn't want to get into politics in '92. But what the legal profession exposed me to early from maybe the second or third case was the exploitation of young males by the police. The police would literally come and pick up guys at the corner by where my office is in Cross Street, Hatfield and Cross, and charge them. Said that they had weed, 5 grams. They get to the guys don't have any weed in them. They get to the station, police produce 5 grams, and that guy moves from hanging on the street corner straight to jail for 3 years. As easy as that.
Were these mostly black guys or black and Indian guys?
No, where I am, there ain't too many Indian people. They're black. This is in a city.
Okay.
I'm
sorry,
sure.
you're in London right now.
No, I'm back in
Oh, you're
Guyana.
back
I'm
in
talking
Guyana.
back
Okay,
in Guyana.
sorry,
I'm
okay.
talking about I'm practicing. I'm
Okay,
back
gotcha.
in Guyana. I'm
Gotcha.
seeing this. I
Gotcha.
see them from my room. I see the police cars pull up.
Okay.
They decide they're picking up 5 people. One of them is going to protest and say, "What are you picking me up for? You're harassing me for?" Bang, he gets charged, gone to jail, 3 years.
Yeah.
And this was happening all the time. So I was blown away. I said, Jesus Christ, you can't take somebody's boy child just like that, no record, anything at all, and send it to jail. And then because I knew what went on to jail is like university. If you spend 2 nights in the jail, trust me, you begin to understand most of the criminal activities. And if you spend 3 weeks, you get your first degree. By the time you spend 3 years, you're a PhD in crime. Simply because 1, to survive in the jail, you gotta have your wits about you. And 2, you just come into contact with people who have special skills. So I saw that happening, and then there was another thing that was going on at the time, vigilantes. These guys these are middle-class guys, would drive into the ghetto and pick up people and beat them up. Just like that. I mean, pick them up and beat them up. Plus, the police, the quick reaction group, the black clothes police, were just taking people out. You'd hear that they go out and they pick up somebody, and I remember seeing bodies come in, they shot somebody and killed them. There actually was a list that used to go down to the black clothes that had those that they did not want returned. So there was a
list from who? From where?
yeah, upstairs in police force. It came down, this guy is what have you. And the level of abuse and the extent to which poor people had no chance, not part of a chance, had no chance. I'd give you a really chilling story. 2:00 in the afternoon, 1:32. My secretary calls me and says, Mr. Hughes, there's a whole set of people downstairs here outside your office. They come to see you. They're very agitated. They want to see you. So I go downstairs and I see them and I say, what's happening? Hey, black clothes in Tiger Bay. They're about to go and kill Fishy. I said, I mean, go and kill Fishy. I knew Tiger Bay at the time because I used to do pro bono work through the Guyana Human Rights Association. So when I came back, I used to do a lot of pro bono human rights work. So they say, you got to come now, right? So I said, all right, no problem. I jump in the car. I drive to Tiger Bay. But of course, the police block off the whole bay. So imagine the black clothes guys at the corner, they standing up with their big weapons. I think the weapon of choice at the time must have been the AK. Whole area blocked off. So they take me through an entrance that nobody knows. So I get into Rosemary Lane. And in those days, they had those tall 5-story wooden buildings that were very dilapidated. And the lady carries me in through a special path, and I start going up the steps. And these steps, missing treaders, they're rough. And I get to the 3rd floor, and there's a police officer. He's now deceased. His gun is cocked, and he's about to shoot this guy. Literally, hand on the trigger, about to shoot this guy. And I walk in and say, not today, Mr. Fraser, not today. And that's how he lived. He would have been, because what had happened, they had reached the stage. So what used to happen in the day is that people used to be trunkers and stealing mirrors and all kinds of stuff. And the police would pick you up, charge you, they'd warn you. And when they get fed up with you, you used to end up on the list to get passed out. And I think he had graduated to that stage by then. And so I went, and that was it. He got saved that day. I never forget. So, of course, he got to arrest him now. Can't kill him. And they bring him down. And, of course, as he comes out and I come out behind him, the whole neighborhood is clapping and cheering and saying, because you save a life that day. Huh?
Yeah.
So all of those experiences had a real impact on me. And out of this, and forgive me if I use any French here, I'm doing a case before a magistrate. And I'm cross-examining this lady. And she says, oh, I don't deal with her. She lives in a shit and shy house. So I heard it, but didn't process it. So I continue crossing. And somehow or the other, I came back to that tangentially. And she said, Mr. Hughes, you know what I'm talking about? You literally defecate in a newspaper and throw it through the window. And I, just trying to get my mind around that, I was like, what? And we had, strangely enough, we had to go and visit the scene in the same case the next week or 2 weeks after that. And I came across people living in 18 people to one room. And in that room, the parents, the kids, the aunts, whatever, all the intimate relations took place in that room in front of the children. Rough stuff, rough stuff. And nobody was, this was like a different world. They lived in a different world, and this stuff impacted me. I can't speak about anybody else, but you get a commitment that nobody should have to ever.
You see that a lot in poverty.
Yeah, well, just the levels of poverty. And
Yeah.
I said, no, this can't happen.
Yeah. So a lot of these experiences influenced your sort of your the way you operate in politics now. Like, I mean, if you're obviously the head of the AFC right now, and you're getting your word out, you're appealing to voters, if you're sort of looking at or pitching to young people, what are you bringing to the political environment in this day and age? Like, what are the problems you're sort of running on today? That, you know, are they similar to what you just explained to me,
No,
or
no.
have they evolved?
No, the experiences and the impact hasn't changed. Today, what Guyana needs for me, well, first of all, let me give you the context. Before Guyana found oil in 2015, we were your sort of basic third world, post-colonial agrarian society.
Yeah.
Depending on sugar, gold was the major export, but no structural change since independence. So literally, whatever the colonialists left us with in terms of the growth of the economy, that was there. Now, a lot of things had changed. We had nationalized sugar industry and a few others. But in terms of the structure of the economy, nothing had changed. And Guyana, we always knew from high school, geography and other classes, had a hell of a lot of natural resources. So we always knew we had gold, we knew we had some rare metals, and our population was small. And growing up, you'd always hear Guyana has great potential, you know, big land space, what have you, rare metals. But we never changed the structure of the economy.
Even I remember that, and I'm a generation after.
Right. So, and then you had that on top of really difficult racial relations.
Yeah.
We didn't have these difficult racial relations as a result of independence. We had them before. Fundamentally difficult relations. And irrespective of how lofty the aspirations of the respective political leaders were, the reality was that in the society, it was split. I never knew growing up how bad it was split. As soon as I came back, it was evidently how bad it was split. And therefore, nobody at the structural level in terms of restructuring the economy was advocating anything new. Part of the reason for that is, and you probably have come post that era, every bright Guyanese was migrating. They weren't staying here. So out, certainly in Saints, QC, no different, Bishops, Christchurch, all those schools, out of every average class of 28 or 30 people, 25 were migrating. So you can't build a society when your best and brightest are not there. You can't even manage what you have, because what happens is the skills to be able to professionally manage the country have gone. One of the regrets Fidel Castro always says was that if he had to do it again, he would need the middle class. And what he really meant was the professionals. Because industry to run efficiently and become competitive, you just need it. I mean, it's not the high flyers, the politicians. It's the guys who are going to manage that, going to look at your expenses and deliver. We had an additional affliction, sugar, which was the thing that kept the country going, was highly subsidized by the Europeans. So we weren't competitive in anything. There was nothing that we did at a global level that was competitive. Highly subsidized by the Europeans, the EU, paying way above the market price. And they told us early, they said, look, this subsidy as a result of WTO, et cetera, is going to go.
Yeah.
You would think, irrespective of the politics, that with that sort of warning, you'd have some new thinking about how you're going to generate some new...
What did they say at the time was the plan?
They have a plan.
Yeah.
There was no plan. This entire country...
Nothing on paper, nothing, just to appease
nothing to say what was post-sugar. Okay. Because what happened was the People's Progressive Party, their supporters were essentially in the sugar industry, so they couldn't talk about not having sugar.
Sure.
And if the People's National Congress did anything with sugar, then you're going to hear
the alienate
precisely. But the point is, we never got any thinkers that said, hey guys, wherever your views are, this party is going to end soon. Let's start thinking creatively about what we're going to do. And then what happened is, of course, when Mr. Hoyt took over in 85, when President Burnham died, he had to do 180 turn from socialism, privatization, et cetera, and that put a whole set of people under the economic recovery program out of work because most of them were in the civil service, and the economy went through very difficult times. We were also very heavily indebted. But we've never had people who think outside the box. And I just want to compare this to Barbados. We used to go to Barbados every summer when I was in probably primary to secondary school. I remember Barbados in 72 being kind of like a ragtag little island with a couple of tourists. And they realized that tourism was the only thing that was going to save them. They had no natural resources. They had, unlike Guyana, the sugar estates were no longer competitive. And they decided, this is our number one industry. And the attitude they had, whether they were littering and they were less than courteous to the tourists, had to change. And they went through public education, et cetera, to the extent now that Barbados is a number one location for tourism, and everybody understands the importance of that industry. Therefore, by and large, when you're in Barbados, you feel safe because people understand that you can't have the violent crime, et cetera, because it affects you, the taxi driver on the street. If the tourist ain't coming, partner, you ain't eating.
Yeah, everybody has a stake.
Everybody has a stake, and they're committed to the project.
Yeah.
Unlike us.
Yeah. We'll get back to the original question. This is a lot of good information. I'm happy you're saying. I'm happy you're thinking.
No, you're asking me about.
I'm asking you about what's your appeal today. As the
Okay.
AFC. This is very useful. Sorry, there was
no. Thanks. I should have gone back.
It's
I got
okay.
distracted.
It's okay. I'm glad we're hashing it out. Sorry, there was another question on my mind. I was literally just about to ask you.
You're gonna come back to that one though.
Let me come back to that one. Let's get back to so today. I mean, look, there's a lot of young voters, and this is the whole point of this platform, by the way. There's a lot of young voters out there who necessarily they're not. I wouldn't say everybody cares and is paying attention.
Have not been fired.
Everybody cares about the politics. Everybody pays attention because it's a big drama soap opera show, right? That's just a fact. It's like, but there's also a cross section of young professionals coming up who want to see a better Guyana. They're hunting for opportunities, and they're undecided. Not to say they have strong feelings towards. They hate this one party. They hate that one party. But they've seen this sort of back and forth go on for years, and like they're looking for something new and fresh, something that appeals to them. That they might not want to necessarily elect a whole new government, but they want some balance in the system. They want like a different voice in there. And you're coming in as that voice. This is like the platform you're running on, I'm assuming. What are you selling the young people? What are you what is your, I know we want to do a number of things, but what's sort of your pitch to them, and are they even part of your targeted demographic?
Yeah, well, clearly they are part of my targeted demographic. But pitch, I prefer to say this is my vision.
Okay, sure.
And this
I'm sorry,
is where
I didn't mean to make you out to be a salesman.
No,
just
not a
language.
problem. It's not a problem at all. And in that vision, you will see where everybody fits in. Okay. So let's start from the position that this is the first time the country has had the resources to actually restructure itself so it gives everybody a fair shot at a better life. Now, that's very broad. It's the first time you have the resources. Unlike Mexico City, we don't have to worry about feeding 20 million people every day. We have a minuscule population with a huge landmass. So we look at resources as a natural, we look at the human resources. you can't build a country if 70 to 80% of your young people are leaving. You can't build a real country. I mean, people will survive, but you don't build a real country. So the obvious question is, you have to ask yourself, why don't young people want to live in Guyana? Just why are they alienated? And there are many reasons. So you also have to bear in mind that the number one product for this country, for income generation for the next 15 years minimum, is going to be oil. That is going to be the sector.
Yeah.
Good. So that sector is going to generate revenues, but it's also going to create business opportunities. Now, oil is not a mass employer. What the revenues do is create or put in the hands of the government the opportunity to change the economic structure and create entrepreneurial opportunities. And also, most importantly, the number one thing for me is education, and at all levels.
Yeah.
So and let's look at the objective statistics. We have, according to the World Health Organization, 20% of our kids in extreme food poverty. That's not a Nigel Hughes figure. That's UNICEF, WHO. We have 40% of them in poverty, food poverty. So we can't, morally and otherwise, live in a country with the resources we have, with the minuscule population we have, and have any food poverty. So that's a priority area. We got to make sure that we feed our young people when they're being educated. And I'm going to go through every level, and starting with those that are in food poverty are probably those that are the most economically disadvantaged. So at the school level, we have to make sure that every student that enters the school gets the basic, or a little bit more than the basic, nutritional input is the wrong term, nutritional nourishment that will allow them to be in a position where they can be receptive for education. And I'm dealing at a primary level across the country. That is that's a moral obligation of any government. It's actually, I would say it's a human right obligation, not moral, it's a human right obligation. So we want to make sure all the children we have at that level are nourished. And secondly, the educational system now is not delivering what we need at the end of it in terms of the industry, and is certainly not creating the ability to think creatively at that critical age between 3 and 8, 9. Because those are the years where the research says that your children perhaps develop the ability to think creatively. We have factories which say the kids got to go to extra lessons at 6, and then they go to school at 8, they stay in school until 2, and then they go back to extra lessons. That's not education. That is literally forcing kids to cram, and they do nothing else. So whether they want to play the violin, whether they want to go into IT and do whatever it is that they want to do, anything outside of academics that gives them the ability to interact, athletics. Not all of us are necessarily academically inclined. Some of us are both academically and athletically inclined. All the opportunities for young people to develop. And sports is not a hang-on or an add-on, I should say. I don't know if you've ever gone to school sports in Jamaica. Inter-school sports in Jamaica is like mini Olympics. And people go on to become the Usain Bolts, the Griffiths, the what have you. And those don't necessarily make it to the top, but they get the sponsorship. So there is an opportunity for sports. But to do that, you have to give children the foundation. You got to have a program. It's not,
so what are you proposing exactly, though? I mean, what does a program look like? I'm
not finished. I'm just dealing with, so on sports, and I'm just saying for sports, we have to have a program.
Yeah.
That it's not, we got a tournament coming up in 6 weeks, so by the way, we're going to do something. No, it's got to have all the developmental stages.
Yeah.
And I'm just dealing with, that's primary school. Good. Secondary school, our best and brightest that come out, that 10, 15% cohort, we send them to the best universities in the globe, on the planet, to do. We fund their study, whether it's MIT, they're going to Harvard, whether they're going to Oxford, Cambridge, University College, whether they're going to China or wherever. We dedicate the support for them to be able to get the best education globally in the hope that they will return. Right now, what's the pass rate in maths? 31%? That's a national disaster. We have to revamp the entire educational system, and we have to make sure. Right now, we're losing 48% of our students who enter high school are not finishing. 48%. That's almost 1 in 2. So we have to make sure those that don't finish have, if they're vocationally inclined, vocational training in relevant areas that will allow them to survive in an oil and gas economy. Because the stats, again, say that the jobs that are going to be available are going to be skilled and semi-skilled. So we have to make sure that we are producing enough people who are going to take those jobs. So if they're dropping out of school at 48%, of course you have to reduce that and investigate what the factors are for that. You must be able to capture them immediately, and you put them in a program, for example, whether you're teaching the vocational offshore welding, etc., that allows them to get trained. But we know that they're likely to have children. Some of them may have children. So we fund them while they study. Because if you say to somebody, you got to go and get qualified, but you're not giving them the economic means to get qualified, then they're going to have to work somewhere else. So whether it's a 6-month, 4-month, whatever course, we give them a stipend. They can run their families, because at least when they qualify, they become certified and they're employable by that industry. Now, here's the problem. In the next 5 years, I think there are about, I can't remember the figure, is 8,000 jobs. In the oil industries, those jobs have to be filled. Now, may be filled because the oil industry is 24/7, 365 days. Most of those are going to be filled by foreigners. That's a fact. So we got to prepare for that. But at least we have to increase the cohort that is Guyanese. Not by just saying, oh, you must have local content, and I'll come to that in a minute. You have to increase the cohort by making sure that that our young people are certified to work in these jobs.
Yeah.
Entrepreneurship, number one thing for any economy, because at the end of the day, it's about the economy growing. And not growing by virtue of the fact that you have a primary resource that you're selling. It has to grow as a result of entrepreneurship. The biggest complaints for young people, they don't have access to capital. Junior stock exchange, absolutely necessary. We have to have a junior stock exchange where people, if you are young and have a marketable idea and you have the economics behind it, or even if somebody provides the economic basis for it, you can put that idea on the junior stock, raise your funds, and go ahead. So if you're doing coding and you come up with an app or whatever it is, you can actually get funding. You don't have to have rich parents. You can actually get that. Women in business. Women are perhaps, I don't want to say successful, but have demonstrated a superior ability in business. But the problem again is funding, and because the system is structured. So that category, for me, one of the things that we have to do is we're proposing create a bank for women that will provide the support that will allow them to get into business. So whereas you may be fetching fruits and vegetables to sell, you can actually have an economic model that moves you to the next stage. If you are providing professional services in IT, if you're providing artificial intelligence, you're in that industry, you can actually, once you have a viable product, you get to it.
What are the amount of these loans kind of looking like, the range of loans, you think?
Well, okay, so you have to look. The whole idea about that is to lift people out of poverty. So the loans will have to be of such a size that, if you are a small business producer, you're providing some support service, let me say, to the oil industry. You're providing some sort of logistical service. You can actually apply for a loan that will give you the ability to grow that business, and you also get the technical assistance. So it's not just giving somebody the money and they don't have the technical assistance.
Yeah.
This has to be married with technical assistance. So you get the loan and you get the technical support. So in the case of the female bank, you get the technical support, the financial support, access to capital, and that goes up the scale. If you are a middle level business woman, that you got a business that's doing well, you're exporting some product, you have a green product that is, you got the right logo, etc. Great for your skin, or cosmetics or whatever. And I don't mean that in the sexist sense of women have to do cosmetics.
No.
Whatever it is that you find, you can grow to the next level.
Yeah. But don't you have any, and just to put it bluntly, faith in the current resources available for that? Small Business Bureau loans, you have the CLDB, TVET, which addresses the
No, TVET doesn't give you money.
No, they don't give you money.
Right,
But
so how
but
are you accessing the capital?
I'm just moving back to I'm going back to your previous points, like the vocational training stuff you mentioned.
No, I mean,
so-
TVET and stuff. Now, how many people are they moving out of poverty by training? I mean, if you think, 15,000, 16,000 kids come out of school every year?
Sure.
All right. Let's be generous, 4,000 or 5,000 of those children, when they come out of school, either go into business or they're employed. TVET is dealing with the other 10,000. Rupanuni, frightening statistic. 4%, 4 to 5% matriculate after 5 years in school. 4 to 5% matriculate. That means 96 to 95% come out of school in Region 9 with no qualifications. So what are you doing with them? It's only because it's remote and we don't see it on the coast. We're blind to it. But what you doing with those young people? They're going to end up, the men will end up going into the gold industry at very, very low level because clearly they don't have the academic qualification for anything else. Not that the gold bush requires more than that. And the women, other than a couple of public sector jobs, that's it. In the indigenous community, again, and it happens, I see this all the time actually in Georgetown, by where I am. Young girls, by the time they're 14, 15, are pregnant.
Yep.
And for the men, because they don't see the economic opportunity that comes necessarily, the rewards that come with hard work, and what they see as criminal activity being rewarded, they end up in crime.
And what do you think about the plans now to pull people out economically? We're seeing a lot of, I think, have you at any point ever advocated for direct cash transfers?
Yeah.
You have. So what do you think
Not
about...
as a permanent, but go ahead.
No, I know. I get that. And granted, I feel like people who advocate for that personally could do a better job at saying that we don't want to do this permanently, because the releases make it seem like this is a permanent thing. But I totally understand that's unsustainable.
But I don't think it should be a one-off either.
Agreed.
Mm-hmm.
But to the question then, one is, what do you think about the alleged one-off now of the 100,000, and then what's the limit? I mean, how do we know when the free money stops?
Okay, so do you accept that this is an economic problem, or it's an economic exercise, not a problem? If you're one to the reason you do direct transfers is because in the time of the bounty we're seeing, the best way of transferring the wealth that has an impact is doing it by way of direct cash transfers.
Yeah.
Trickle down does not work. And in Guyana, in the present economic structure, let's just walk through the trickle down. The opportunities are coming in infrastructure development, road contracts and building hotels and what have you. So it's only the construction industry that is benefiting there. So you get a construction company, the employees that work with you get paid by you. And if you have 200 employees, if that many, I doubt whether most of them have that number, those are the only people who get anything as a result of the trickle down.
Yeah.
It ain't trickling down any other way. Now, this is not wealth that is generated as a result of the energies of any of us. This is pure God-given luck that they put 18 million barrels or however 18 billion barrels or how many billion barrels under the Earth's surface. We don't have the capacity to take it out. We hire the people that have the capacity, and we're getting whatever your percentage. That's all we're getting. Mm-hmm. Now, we have to take that not only to manage and invest it well, but we got to transfer some of that somehow directly to all the citizens. If you leave it to the trickle down, the people at the top will benefit, and the people at the bottom who are in the cycle of perpetual poverty will see nothing. So the idea behind cash transfers now is that you transfer some wealth. Now here's where I differ from both of the other parties. The ability to transfer wealth to the citizens directly has to be economically responsible. How do you become economically responsible? Not the politicians. We are always motivated about how we're going to get votes. So we put together a commission of highly qualified economists, local and international, who will examine the economy, they will examine our reserves, they will examine the investment portfolio for the Natural Resource Fund, and they will say, this is what can be distributed at this time. Because if oil drops to $10 a barrel and you commit to any figure, you are burying the future of the country. Yeah. So you can't say 100,000, you can't say 5,000 US a year, you can't say 100,000 a month, whatever, because it depends on the context.
You think 100,000 was totally arbitrary?
Of course it's arbitrary. Because what happened, the 2 days before they said 100,000, it was 200,000 a household.
Yeah.
And how do you, as a leader of a country, decide that you're going to give 200,000 per household and you have no idea of how they're going to determine what a household is?
Yeah.
And in a country like Guyana, where there are multiple families living in one building, you must know. You don't have to be a rocket scientist before you announce that to know that that is problematic. And the second you get blowback, okay, 100,000 per citizen, and you're not locating this in growth. So, for example, we've got, I think we've earned, what, 5 billion US up to now? If you have a stock portfolio and conservatively, they're parking that if that was parked in the federal government institution, you probably would get somewhere between, I'm not even sure if you get to 4 or 3%. Under the National Resource Fund, there's actually, they define the areas for investment of parts of that fund. So if we had invested, other than 2022, that money on the market and we had the experts within the parameters, we would have gotten more money than we are getting now. The only reason 2022 was an anomaly was because, of course, the Ukraine war came and the oil prices went up. And so, we had a bonanza there. But the management of these funds requires really professional advice, real professional. We don't want to end up like the lottery winner. We win $15 billion and then all of a sudden we don't know where it is in 10 years. If we're planning a country to go down the line, the professionals have to really advise us on the investment, and they have to say, hey, Alex, this is what you can afford to give away. Other thing about direct transfers, we believe, and I don't think we're the only ones, that you have to use it also as an incentive for areas of development. And let me just use an example. In Brazil, they have a thing called the Bolsa Familia. And what that does is for young students at primary school, they say to the mothers, you will get a direct transfer, but you got to do the following. Got to make sure your kid goes to school. Punctuality. At the end of whatever the cycle is, we got to review your kid's academic performance. Otherwise, you got to reduce grant or no grant.
Yeah.
Plus, on the health front, we got to make sure that your child is being fed properly so that the weight and the age are consistent within the parameters. So you create the incentive for people who are economically challenged to make sure that their kids, one, get healthy, two, attend school, and three, perform academically, while you provide the institutions and the teaching. And it's areas like that you identify in development that you create the opportunities for direct transfers.
Where do we fall short on those things? Because obviously they are certain, it might not be complete revolutionary systems yet, but there are some things like that exist within the educational system with feeding kids and, because we care grants and stuff like that. How do we sort of, is it just too early to see the effects of that? Or is it something that is just managed poorly, in your opinion?
We don't have an appetite for data in Guyana.
Right.
Everything should be data.
That I can agree with you
We have
on.
no appetite for data. And you can't make a decision about where it's falling short if you don't have the information.
Sure.
I mean, other than that, it's a rhetorical discussion. I mean,
Yeah.
Nigel thinks this, Alex thinks that. But
Yeah.
if this is
Sure.
not grounded in data, you can't make the decision. So I can't say to you the cash grant works or doesn't work because nobody's publishing the information.
The
and
withholding
impact.
of that is all power driven, or
Well, we have to remove a lot of this power by virtue of the Constitution away from the politicians.
right?
We have to, must, because the incentive is to do things that are popular, but that may not necessarily be sensible.
Mm-hmm.
So if you just come down to the ethnics in Guyana, the ethnic situation, you can't have a country that is as multi-ethnic as Guyana that says if you win 50% of the vote, you get 100% of the power. Can't happen.
Yeah.
Suriname says, look, the president is elected by 60% of the parliament. That forces those parties to sit down and become rational about what they want. So if you thought you're going to go off on some ethnic adventure alone, you're going to end up being president.
Yeah.
You have to be able to command 60%. And that means you will pull substantial numbers, not 5% from here and 5%. You will pull substantial numbers from the ethnicities. And that drives the agenda because no longer the agenda could afford to be skewed in one direction alone. Otherwise, you ain't getting there. So the whole incentive regime has to change.
I mean, you could still play your games, but you got to give up some blood, I guess. You got to.
But that's the point.
Yeah.
And it's good. We have to
definitely,
force
definitely.
the political class to talk to each other.
Yeah. Speaking of, I mean, before we go on to that, I there's just quite a few more things I want to talk about. The other day, I saw you recently came out and gave some statements on the 5:30 meeting the other day. I'm kind of torn, or I was torn with how I felt about it. When I first saw it, I definitely was happy because, we always see these projects stalled and, tons of money being wasted. They're inept. They are, it's clearly piled up to certain companies, so seeing some sort of accountability was refreshing to me. Initially on the face value, right? Mm-hmm. But then I guess when you spend some time with it, I feel like, I was happy what the president did by showing some sort of, authority. but I felt, he had the murderer at gunpoint and basically said, "Get out of here." So that's a bad analogy given what we spoke
No, no,
about.
no, 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 no.
But I just feel like there should have been some blood, Like I feel like it was an opportunity to make a statement, in some regard, to really show contractors and ministers and whoever's responsible for these systems that they have to work, or else the consequences will be severe. And I don't want to just, again, maybe I'm hoping that something still happens, but I just don't want it. I think it's dangerous to do that and then it to just be a pomp show, So what are your thoughts on that? I mean, you've already said.
I have a completely different perspective. You name me your 5 top companies in the world. Well, Nike, whoever your 5 top favorite companies are, whether it's
Apple,
Apple, whoever,
Google, whatever.
Good, Apple and Google. If you are the CEO of, either the chief financial officer, the CEO of Google, and you wake up one morning and you suddenly discover that Google is not functioning, and you call in with all your top level and middle managers at a public hearing in front of the shareholders and berate them, do you think that is an efficient way of dealing with Google not functioning properly? You have structures.
Yeah.
People, shareholders fire directors because they don't perform. You are the president of a country. You think that Mr. Trump should call, or Mr. Biden should call all his secretaries of state, all the deputy secretaries of state, line them up in the Senate, and then invite the cameras and berate them, and then say, call the contractor from Lockheed Martin. No system works like that. No efficient system. Maybe in the communist world it does, but it doesn't. And it comes down to management. And management means that, first of all, somebody at the top has to be responsible. If you're my CEO and I'm looking at my balance sheet and it's not working, you're going to have to tell me why it's not working. I'm not going behind you to find out why it's not working. And if it's not working, thank you very much. No. If you look at the problem, and there is an explanation for it, but I'll come to that in a minute. First of all, the people who get the contracts today are not necessarily the people who are best qualified for those jobs. And we've had some glaring examples. You've had the contract with Tupui to a company that had absolutely no history in the construction of the pump house or whatever it is. In the Schoonard Highway, you have companies that have been awarded contracts that are $600 million in excess of the engineer's estimate, where all the other bidders, experienced companies, have been eliminated as being non-compliant. Now, how do you get to $600 million above the engineer's estimate? It means your system is not working.
Yeah.
People are being given contracts that shouldn't be given contracts. And the contracts within themselves have the remedies because they have to be supervised. You give people notices of default. You say what is non-compliant. And there are remedies. The rest of the world, they build huge infrastructure projects, multi-million-dollar highway skyscrapers, based on how the system operates. We can't reinvent that. And the president inviting everybody in front of the media, the only outcome of that is humiliation. You
Right.
call your ministers and then you call their permanent secretaries. If you have a difficulty in education, you roast the Minister of Education on a one-on-one, or if you want to do that in cabinet. What are you gaining by humiliating her and her permanent secretary in front of everybody? What are you really gaining? Because at the end of the day, if you're looking at the contract, each one you should do a deep dive in. It can't be, oh, you didn't start yet? Oh, I ain't got the order to start yet. That does. What are you gaining by that? How are you rectifying that problem? And then what? You're firing people on contracts and you don't have the information? This is clearly a publicity stunt. But the real problem with Guyana, if we can address it, before we found oil, in some cases, 60% of the budgeted allocation, Ministry of Public Works, for example, went back to the Treasury because Guyana didn't have the capacity. We didn't have the capacity before oil to deliver on those infrastructural projects. Mm-hmm. We now have oil. We have a lot of money. And imagine pouring that money on a system which couldn't even deliver before, but all we had was gold and sugar. But where are you finding the capacity? If we were building 2 cars a week, even though they were giving us money to build 5 cars, and the money for the 3 cars went back to the Treasury, how does putting money for 10 cars, when you could only build 2, improve your capacity?
Yeah.
Can't. So we have a capacity problem.
Yeah. I did hear an argument the other day about them saying, we're on this sort of highway of development, and that if we, try to scale it down now, we're not going to get the development we are on track to get.
What is the development that we're
I'm not sure.
That's precisely the point. We're using a lot of beautiful slogans, but we don't know what they mean.
Right.
Outside of Georgetown and its environments and repairing a couple of roads in rural communities, what have we done that is transformational?
What would you have done in that quote-unquote meeting, whether it was public or private?
I would never have a meeting like that.
Well, what would you have? Who would you have asked? Well, how would you have dealt
I
with
would
that
call,
situation?
if education is failing, I'll call the Minister of Education to my office.
Right.
Along with her experts. I would look at the data. I would have gathered the data before summoning the Minister of Education and say, Madam Minister, this is what the information I have gathered discloses. This contract is 2 years behind. This contract, we've already gone over budget by et cetera, et cetera. What is your position? The minister either has or does not have a position. If the minister does not have a position that I find satisfactory, I would thank him or her for their services.
Okay.
I am gaining nothing. You tell me where humiliation works. Where does it work? You give me an example, whether in school, if you call out a kid and you embarrass him, you say, you're stupid, you're not doing this. Where has humiliation worked as an incentive for improved performance? If I'm working with you and you're not happy with my performance, you call me in if you want to give me the opportunity, or you send me home. What are you gaining by calling the media to say, oh, Nigel has not performed? Look, he has not performed. How does that help your company get better out of me?
Yeah. Well, it definitely exposed a lot of inefficiencies in the public sector.
But the killer point is this. If all of these people, all of these ministers who I have identified, handpicked, and appointed, in my view, have performed so badly that I need to call the press in at 5:30 to humiliate them, the buck stops at me, huh?
Right.
Because that is a confession that I either have not appointed the right people or I have not been on the ball. And this is after 4+ years in office, after 4+ years of oil production. Right. Was I sleeping before? Unfortunately, in Guyana, we get very distracted by dramatic acts.
Yeah. Sure. I last, just to close on that point, I personally just think it's beneath the president to have to do all that. Like, he shouldn't be dealing with contractors directly, and that's the various ministries' jobs, and to make those big calls. And it just, I just did the whole lack of communication too was very telling and unfortunate. It doesn't really give me confidence in any system, seeing it like that.
Can I ask you a question? Alex, aren't there cabinet meetings every week? Every single Thursday, whatever it is a cabinet meeting. So you've seen these ministers every week.
Yeah.
Is there something preventing you from inquiring then? about, areas of concern that you have.
Sure. I just want to turn back to you. You know, we have roughly a year now until the next
Less.
election. Yeah.
Okay.
Less?
Well, it's got to be by November, I suppose. Yeah, a
Yeah.
year.
Let's call it a year. Um, you know, we're still sort of figuring out where you stand and what the party's role is going to be and how you're going to campaign. I know you're probably still planning all this out, and I hope you could give me a little sneak peek about what's going on. But you know, what is could you tell me if you guys are planning to run as a coalition again, or are you going to do it alone this time?
And I give you the answer I've given everybody else. The Alliance for Change is concentrating on rebuilding the party.
Okay.
We have had a fall in our standing in the population. You will remember that Mr. Charandas was a member of the Alliance for Change. He voted for the no confidence motion. We have had other issues. And so before we can get to a position where we can determine how it is we are going to enter the elections, we have to rebuild our party. A lot of that is going to be driven by the data. And I don't know what the data is going to look like in 3 months compared to where it is now.
What dates are you
No,
specifically looking at?
well, we right now are on a listening and grounding exercise. We're also monitoring a lot of other data, and that data will tell us where our standing is. What are the touch points for the population? What are the areas where, when you look at the social media data, where people seem to be interested or reactive or responsive to various issues? So in the listening and grounding tour that we're doing right now, we are actually listening very carefully to what the people are saying, both demographically, what are the touch button issues, because you can sit down in Georgetown in a lawyer's office and have an impression of what you think is important to the people, but until you get out there and
Yeah.
they actually tell you.
Do you think the response online versus in person differs greatly, or they're
Well, they're different things. So, for example, and I'm picking these just ones. Indigenous communities, the internet density is low, so most of that stuff you have to do in person.
right?
A lot of most of the contemporary elections, most of the work is done online,
Yeah.
and that's where you got to start harvesting your data and assessing it and turning it over and have the experts look at it. And that's what we're doing. We haven't started doing any real work in Georgetown. We've done a couple of walkabouts, but Georgetown essentially starts within the next week, because Georgetown is a big demographic.
Sure.
So after I have actually started going into several of those communities, I'd be in a better position, and we gather that data as we go around. I'd be in a better position to tell you whether what you hear or what you get online is different from in person.
Yeah.
As you know, we've just finished, the Americans have just finished an election in which Mr. Trump, if you listen to the polls, they were neck and neck. It turned out that the results were nowhere near
Yeah.
neck and neck.
No, he crushed it.
So,
Yeah.
technology has its
Sure.
limitations.
Sure. And polls are,
Yeah, and in Guyana it's very difficult to poll. Not that we don't do it, but it's difficult to poll because people tell the pollster, depending what he looks like, what he wants to hear.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting. But, have you not, is there also data points you're pulling from based on, the previous couple of years and including the tenure of when the coalition was in power? Are there things that you pull from there as well, or are you totally rebuilding? I mean,
Well,
do you think, sorry, just quickly.
Sorry, my apologies.
It's okay. Do you think that the citizenry looks at the party as something new as well? Or are they sort of just considering you, what they've considered you for the last 4 years? Do they understand that you're rebuilding or rebranding?
That's a question of messaging. And what I will say is a lot of the modern elections have indicated it's not about the personality, it's about the message.
Okay.
And the message is important, and we want to make sure that our message is clear. We want to make sure our message is distinguishable and that people have a clear idea where we stand on specific subjects.
Okay.
So this is not a question of whether Nigel Hughes is popular or unpopular, as the case may be. This is a question of what the message from the Alliance for Change is about what it's going to do to change the country.
Okay.
So that's where we are.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's for me. It's just hard to. I guess like in the media, the narrative really plays on what people identify the party as, and right now I think the public perception, not all, but a big part of it, maybe still just sees the opposition and they clump all opposition together, even though they're not, right? You know that this is how it kind of goes. But it just doesn't feel like there's sort of any cohesion within those groups, and I could be wrong, and I hope I am. But to me, it sort of gives because of that feeling, it also gives an unfair advantage to the incumbent,
Well, we haven't gotten into campaign period yet. The second that you get into campaign period, everybody's going to have their message out there, and everybody will have an opportunity at that time to look at the message, look at the manifestos, look at what people are saying. For us, I don't think we can continue in picking an easy topic with the same constitution because it just doesn't work.
Yeah. And you don't feel pressed for time to get that message out.
Oh, no. Of course we pressed for time. We started behind the 8 ball. I mean, we had our national conference in July, and we are, we're behind the ball. But elections are not cheap. One has to fundraise, and we need to be moving a lot more rapidly than we are. But we're not going to lament. We can only improve, or at least attempt to improve. I mean, it's interesting. When we had our national conference in July, we were a dead party. Many people thought we were dead meat. We're a dead party. We don't exist. We're at the stage now where I don't think the vice president misses a press conference, misses an opportunity at the press conference to attack the Alliance for Change and its membership, unless he's a pathologist. Not sure why he's spending so much time in dead meat.
Yeah. I'm not sure how to respond to that, but it's entertaining. I mean, I think like this is kind of what it's hard for people, I guess, in this day and age to go and look at a long form unless they really want to be informed, right? They just still look at the head bites. So when
your generation is TikTok,
100%,
Absolutely.
but it's also happened before with headlines too. I will say it's obviously worse now, but so whether I'm not going to comment on what his position is, but if he comes out and says, "Oh well, AFC doesn't have a plan. They have no
He's
plan," I guess it works both ways. That's just the politics.
yeah, but we've spoken about a lot of things recently.
Yeah.
We've spoken about we're going to be setting up
Yeah.
a women's bank.
Yeah. No, well, I'm just
progressive.
saying that's what resonates with the viewership that turn it into a soundbite, right? And that's kind of where society's getting their information a lot for the most part now. But which is why I'm happy to have these sit downs where we can discuss and clear. A couple more. Do you there's some talk about you being Exxon being your client with the law firm, and then they've also raised this issue of how are you going to manage the country should you get elected, while looking out for the interests of Exxon. You said, you're not, once you are elected into office, hypothetically, you'll drop Exxon as you will recuse yourself from your law firm.
I have to. I can't be running a law firm and being the president at the same time.
So that means like totally everything outside of the law firm. No, no association.
No, I can't. Nobody. Well, I can't say nobody. I can't be a sitting president and be a practicing lawyer. I can't turn up and go to court. I can't write opinions for clients. I cannot. I would be the president, so I can't
Are
do
you still
that.
allowed to be invested in the business?
Invested meaning what? Own shares in the
Yeah.
business? Okay, well, there's nothing here that's unprecedented, you know. What people do in other societies, they either set up blind trust or what have you. Now, the business is one that I have built, but the question is now whether I'm still invested in the business if government contracts go to the business. No. So
Cool.
that's Dick Cheney was exceedingly successful before he became the vice president. I mean,
I'm not questioning it. I just
no. I'm
like,
just saying
yeah,
to you, they're more in Barbados,
yeah,
the
just interested to know.
particularly successful lawyer, Mr. Thompson, ran a law firm, very successful, became the Barbadian prime minister.
Yeah.
Mia Motley was a practicing lawyer. She's the prime minister.
Yeah.
Was won all the seats twice.
And last question for the night. Do you feel you need to apologize for anything? This is like the song just based on current events. And I'm being very facetious here. I'm not trying to be an asshole.
But when you say for anything you mean in my life, you want me to
No,
apologize for being
is there
Nigel
anything?
Hughes?
Is there anything in? So I'll just be blunt, and I'll, again, I'm just putting all the cards on the table. There obviously is this perception by a lot of people that, the last election, which was the coalition, they tried to interfere in the election and derail it. And obviously, there's a case going on. I know you're involved in that, and you can't talk much on it. But they're obviously, attributing a part of it to you, being associated with the party. Is there anything that you can say to change the opinions of those people that think you may have something to do with that?
To do with what? The unusual practices during the last election?
Yes, of course.
I was a citizen. I didn't have anything to do with the last election.
Okay.
And I'm happy that you've raised this because there are many things that people accuse me of, including the 3334, 3332. That opinion was given to President Ramatar at his request from senior counsel way back in 2013 or 2014. When he left office, he left the opinion there.
Okay.
I knew of the opinion and I advanced it. So it's not a Nigel Hughes idea. Secondly, on the apology issue, I would start by asking you, have you asked Gyaff to apologize? Has anybody asked Gyaff to apologize? No. Has anybody asked Justice for All to apologize? No. Has anybody asked the Working People's Alliance to apologize? No. Has anybody asked the People's National Congress to apologize? No. So it seems to me that we've been a little selective by asking the Alliance for Change to apologize. And if the largest opposition party, which is the People's National Congress, has not been asked to apologize, the question is why? Are you saying because they are expected to behave this way, they don't have to apologize? Is it that you're saying because their supporters look a particular way, therefore they don't have to apologize? Because the inference is a little troubling. Nobody else has been asked to apologize. Not a single other person. And merely because I inquire specifically about what aspect of the elections, because no Alliance for Change person has been charged.
Yeah.
Nobody has said that the Alliance for Change polling agent interfered with the process. Mm-hmm. So, but exactly. And I was not in a single elections case at any level, whether first instance, second instance, or the Caribbean Court of Justice. I have only been defending people who have been accused of being involved. And as you know, for my reputation, I defend some of the least popular people, depending on where you sit in the political spectrum. So what the Alliance for Change is merely inquiring, but what I will remind you of is that when I took office in July, I specifically said that the Alliance for Change will be conducting an investigation into its operations while it was in government and its conduct during the 2020 election. When we finish that process, I'd be in a better position to say that the process has disclosed that X, Y, and Z happened, and therefore we would do this differently or otherwise. I cannot prejudge what I've said we will do.
All right. Well, Nigel Hughes, thank you so much for sitting down with me. I think this is a marathon for me, but I'm happy we did it.
No, pleasure being here.
I really did enjoy it, and I really did appreciate you being patient and answering my questions. And I think as we continue to develop as a country, we need to have more of our leaders come and talk to different demographics and not just rely on the sort of echo chambers. And I'm really happy you came, and I hope we can do this again.
You certainly can. I have a question for you.
Absolutely.
On the young people.
Absolutely.
In several countries, the young people, who numerically are in the majority, get together and create their own political movement. Why are they looking on as observers? Question to ponder.
I think, if I may, one reason might be that they, like maybe you in your youth want to focus on the on the free enterprise, on building a career, making some money, and I think, and it's no, I'm not going to shy away from the fact that getting into politics prevents you from doing that, or can hinder you in having an independent, economically profitable life.
What you're really saying to me is that you can't run business and do politics because the politics will interfere with your business.
Of course.
And I am a victim of that. I can tell you about that. And that is a bad place for any country to be. Because if Alex Arjun wants to run his business and be in politics, why should his business suffer as a result of political intervention, either directly or indirectly? You should take the United States of America. You think that if Kamala Harris won, that Elon Musk would be worried?
No.
People should be allowed, you could say he's too rich, but people should be allowed to run their own business. And unfortunately in Guyana, we've accepted, and that's what you've just said, we've accepted that you can't do politics and business, when in effect, your business will depend on the political environment in which you work. It is what it is.
Thanks
Thank
again.
you very much.
Appreciate you.
Okay, thank you.